I'm going to introduce, of course, those of you that were on last week. I apologize, I'm not able to make Saturday mornings, but Deacon Anthony Stokes, of course, is no stranger to those of us who have been involved in music. He is a prolific choir director, teacher, and we're so thrilled to have him teaching this series on the Vigil this evening. This is the second of 3 classes that we're having, 3 webinars on the all-night Vigil. This second class is on the Vesper service, so the various permutations of the Vesper service. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the host to Deacon Anthony, and then he'll be able to control his screen from there. I think I might have just, there he is. All right.
All right. Let's give it a try and see here.
Hi, everyone. Looking good. And we will ask you to mute your microphones during the webinar. And then, of course, at the end, you're free to ask any questions that you want. If you have any comments, you can leave those in the chat during the webinar. Absolutely, we'll take care of those, and you can comment to me directly if you'd like, if you have any technical issues.
All right.
Deacon Anthony.
Can everybody hear me okay? Great. All right. It's good to be back with everyone, especially those who were here last week. If you weren't here last week, that video is available on the OCA's YouTube channel, and you can find the video from last week where we talked about rubrics and introduction to services and ranks of feasts and all those different kinds of terms that might come up tonight, that if you're wondering what they are, then you can go back and watch last week's video. What we're going to talk about tonight, though, is Vigil, or the first half of Vigil, which is Vespers. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of Vespers, but we're going to focus on Vespers as part of Vigil and kind of how that order goes. Talk about some musical things that you might need to know, and all that kind of stuff as it comes up. So again, when we're talking about the all-night Vigil, in this webinar, we're talking about the Russian version, which would be the all-night Vigil that is, just Vespers and Matins, and then the first hour generally. During the seminars, especially next week with Matins, we're going to talk about things that you can leave out. If you're doing Vigil and you don't want to do the whole thing, because the whole thing can take several hours. What are places that you can shorten it or change? And a lot of that's going to be in Matins. Vespers, there's actually things you can add sometimes to Vespers, but generally there's not a lot that we cut out. So we're going to talk about those kinds of things as we go along with the different types of Vesper services and different types of vigils. And we're also going to focus mostly on what Vigil would be like on a Saturday night, because the Saturday night Vigil is kind of a standard service. But I will mention things that apply to festal vigils as well. They can be any day of the week. All right. So again, just like last week, I want to thank Father Tom and the other people of the OCA Department of Liturgical Music for sponsoring these talks and encouraging you to go and use their website. We will again look at some of the different things on the OCA website tonight as we go along. But when it comes to music for Vespers, some of it's not available there. So I do at the end have some links to some other places where you can find music that you might need when you're putting together Vesper services or Vigil as we go along. All right. So we're going to start there on the OCA site actually, and take a look at their outline that they have for Vespers, which is, again, if you go to the Liturgical Music and Text page, there is a rubrics section And then they have an outline for liturgical services. And here in the middle of this first section is a Vespers outline. And basically what this does is this shows some of the different versions of Vespers and kind of how they're organized. We're going to go through this outline on the slides, but this is just to show you that this exists and that you can go to this if you don't have some other way to see the outline of Vespers. But it has various options. Here's the Great Vespers at Vigil, Great Vespers when it's not a Vigil, which is something that definitely happens quite a bit. Daily Vespers, and then they have some other comments. This side over here is really interesting because they have things about theological themes. The theme of Vespers is quite a bit creation, and it kind of talks about that and links to other articles that talk about the different parts of Vespers. And then on the left side has the different parts of Vespers, and then tells you kind of what they are or how they occur in the different types of services, whether it's Vigil or not Vigil or just daily Vespers. And as we go through the Vigil outline, then we'll talk about here's what's different with daily Vespers or when it's not a Vigil. And we'll be able to kind of see how that goes. All right, so this outline, though, is available here on the OCA website, along with several others. The other that we looked at a little bit last week is that also on the rubrics page, they have the actual rubrics for upcoming services. So if you don't want to take the time to try to figure this out, at least for the Sundays, Sundays are done all the way up through Palm Sunday right now. There are full outlines, so you can go and look at, let's say we wanted to look at last night's. You can open that up and you get an outline here. I'll pull it over once it's open. Well, let's see. I'm actually not on my own computer tonight, so this is asking me a few extra questions. But you can see here, the Word document, they have the full outline for the Vigil, telling you all the rubrics that you need to know for that service. And it does include Matins. While they may not have the text for Matins yet, they do have the outlines for you if you're going to be doing Vigil. So that's what's available here on this order of upcoming services page. All right, so let's go back to the presentation now. And so we're going to start with what are some of the things you need to know before the service? How do you prepare for Vespers during a Vigil? There's a few things that you need to know, and they may seem obvious, but again, and this was a related question from last week, but everything I'm showing you is stuff that you would need to know so that you can do this on your own if you ever need to. Yes, it's all covered in the St. Tikhon's rubrics book, or it's all covered on the OCA website or other places, and the services are done for you. But this is all, my goal is to teach people how to do it themselves. So this will teach you how to do all this without the need to go to other resources if you didn't need to. So the things you would need to know to prepare for Vespers. Number one, the tone of the week. And if you really can't figure it out, you can always just go to the wall calendars that many of us get from St. Tikhon's. They have the tone of the week listed at the beginning of every Sunday. The tone of the week from the Octolicos starts on Saturday night. So we just started with tone 2 last night, and we'll be tone 2 all week. But we use the Octolicos up until next Saturday afternoon. And technically it starts with Vespers on Saturday night and it ends with the 9th hour the next Saturday, would be kind of how the week goes. So we will be using that tone, and so that tone is on the web wall calendars that we all get. It'll say the tone of the week. So you need to know the tone of the week because that's the part of the Octolicos that you're going to be pulling from. And if you're doing Matins, like we'll talk about next week, you'll need to know which part to look in for the canons and things like that. And then you also, obviously, what feast or saint are you commemorating this day? Or whatever kind of, maybe not a feast or a saint, but what is the, like the parables right now. So for the Triodian Sundays, right, they're not necessarily feasts or saints. It's the New Testament reading, the gospel reading, the prodigal son, or the publican and the Pharisee, or the Last Judgment. I don't know if we'd necessarily call these feasts, but you need to know what it is that you're going to commemorate. And some of them are quite obvious, like, we're in the Triodian now, so everybody's doing the prodigal son. But say you show up to a service and there are two different saints for that day. You don't know which one to do. The answer to that one is usually ask the priest what he wants, or what do you have available? What do you have the services for? And just because the calendar says do this, doesn't necessarily mean that every church is going to do that same service, because there may be various reasons you want to do a different saint on that day. If it's Saint or January 10th is Saint Gregory of Nyssa and Saint Theophan the Recluse. They're both bigger services. So you need to, you'd have to decide which one to do, and your church may have 10 people named after Saint Theophan the Recluse, and so you're going to do the service for them because they've requested it instead of Gregory of Nyssa, which might be what's on the calendar. So sometimes those kind of things can be changed, and those decisions are usually made by the priest. So it's one of those ask your priest kind of questions, but you do need to know, because then again, where are you going to be pulling texts from for this Vesper service? Is it from this saint, or are we doing it from here, or from the Triodian, or whatever? And then all of those kind of lead you to what books do you need? Are we going to be using the Manaean tonight? Are we going to be using the Triodian, or the, which part of the Octoicos, which volume, whatever it is all kind of figured out by knowing these answering these questions, which tone of the week and what is the feast or saint, at least for Saturdays. You do need to know the tone of the week for most days, but if it's a festal vigil, generally the Octoicos is not used. So if you're doing vigil on a weekday, for a great feast or even for a saint, you most likely won't be using the Octoicos at all, because if it's a vigil class saint, everything comes from the Manaean and the Octoicos isn't used. So the tone of the week is not as important for weekday vigils, but for Saturday night, always, unless it's Palm Sunday or Pentecost, some of those big Sunday great feasts that kind of throw the Octoicos out. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through an outline of Vespers during a vigil and talk about different things. I've also included by request some information about bells for people that want to know more about ringing bells and how bells are used. And this information comes from kind of the new company, the new church bell ringing company that's been started, and you can find videos and things like that from them. But they have a document that's available about bell ringing, and he gave me permission to use some of these things in here. But this, and it starts with the very beginning. So, vigil, Vespers during vigil starts differently than Vespers without vigil. It's a very different beginning. And what's happened in a lot of churches in the OCA, and that's not to say that this is the wrong or anything, but what a lot of places do is they don't do vigil on Saturday night, but they want to do the vigil beginning, right? So they start Great Vespers as if it's vigil, and do the whole vigil beginning. Great Vespers by itself starts in a different way. And if we were to go back and look at the chart, we talked about last week, though, it starts with the usual beginning. And again, that's everything that the reader says, from glory to thee our God, O heavenly King, all the way through come let us worship. Sometimes called the ordinary beginning or the usual beginning. And that's how Great Vespers is supposed to start when it's by itself. Even if it's Saturday night, if you're doing Great Vespers by itself, that's the real rubrical way to start. And then the reader reads Psalm 103. It starts off like a normal kind of daily Vespers. And but what's happened in a lot of churches is that they do the vigil opening, even though they're not doing vigil. And so this is the vigil opening. So vigil starts with the appeal of 3 movements. That's the specific type of bell ringing that you do, ending right when the deacon comes out. But vigil starts with a silent censing at the beginning. So the priest and the deacon, if you have one, and everything I'm going to say tonight is the full version, which is a priest with a deacon. If you don't have a deacon, then most of everything just gets replaced by the word priest in this outline. But the priest and deacon sense the altar silently, without before the service starts, without any singing or anything like that. And sometimes even they'll do the whole entire great censing. There's different practices here, but they might cense the entire church. Sometimes we'll do that in our church if the choir is just not ready yet. The priest will just go ahead and cense the whole church silently, because that's actually what's in the book. But very often it's just they cense the altar, and then the deacon comes out after the altar has been censed, and starts the service by saying, "Arise, Master, bless." And then the priest gives the opening exclamation for matins when you're serving vigil, right? If it was Great Vespers, he would just say, blessed is our God. But since it's matins, he does glory to the Holy Consubstantial Life Creating Trinity. And that's the matins opening that's been pushed to the beginning of vigil for Vespers. So again, it's kind of odd if you're not serving vigil to start Vespers with that matins opening, even though you're not going to do matins later. So there's some very different options that come up here. So after the priest does the opening, the choir sings Amen. Then there are two options for what happens next. The more traditional option is that the clergy sing "Come, Let Us Worship," and fall down before Christ our King. And so it may just be the one priest by himself. It may be multiple ones. It may be all the clergy in the altar. It just depends. But typically the clergy sing "Come, Let Us Worship." But there is a very standard tradition in Russian churches for the choir to sing it instead, or all the people to sing it, for everyone present. So you have these two different options of how the service can start, whether it's just the clergy singing, or whether it's everyone, or the people or the choir that sing "Come, Let Us Worship," all together. Then once that's sung, then the choir starts singing Psalm 103. And so again, it typically is only sung when it's a vigil, but also sung very often when it's just Great Vespers. Even our local cathedral here does it that way too. So it's a very standard kind of practice to sing Psalm 103 any Saturday night Great Vespers. But it's not the entire psalm normally. So in the Russian tradition, we pick a few verses and we sing them with refrains. And they can vary. The number of verses can vary by the setting. It depends on which setting you use, or who the composer is. They all have different numbers of verses. In the Greek tradition, Psalm 103 is not sung that way. It's even at a vigil, even if they're doing the big 7-hour all-night vigils, they don't sing the opening psalm. They read it up to a certain point. Then they start chanting. And they actually chant this version of the end of the psalm that has these extra verses written, and just that second half of Psalm 103 can last 29-30 minutes, all the way up to the longest one I've ever seen a video of is 1 hour and 18 minutes, just the second half of Psalm 103 being sung at the beginning of a vigil, so in Byzantine chant. So it's quite a big to do, in those Athonite style vigils. But in the Russian tradition, we sing various versions. And, one of the things you have to think about with Psalm 103 as a choir director, especially, is how you choose the setting you're going to do. There are a few things that kind of dictate how that's going to happen. And the main one is, how big is your church? And how fast are your clergy, basically. The bigger the church, the longer version of Psalm 103 that you need to sing, because again, if the clergy are doing the censing after Come Let Us Worship, then they have to cense the entire church, while you're singing. The priest has to go in and take off his phelonion still while you're singing, and he has to come out and try to read as many of the prayers that a priest is supposed to read at the beginning of the service as possible. And very often they don't get through all of them just because there's no time. And then the deacon has to have time to put his candle up, go and venerate the high place, and come back out, and be ready to go. So these are some of the things that a lot of people don't think about. And as a deacon, I find it to be my goal in life now to teach people that there's a lot in the altar that happens that your music needs to cover, basically. And as a deacon choir director, it's easy for me now to tell people, like, this is what you've got to do, because I've got to have, the deacon's got to have time to do this, or the priest has to do this, and whatever. So those are all the things that are happening during Psalm 103. You may just think like, we're going to pick this setting because it's pretty, but the question I'm going to ask a lot, in all these classes, and I'm trying to ask everybody now is why. You have to think of the question why you're doing anything when it comes to church music. Is it everything needs to be done for a reason? You pick a setting, yes, because it's beautiful, but also, does it fit the liturgical function that's happening? Is it right for your choir? Is it right for your church? It's all these different things that happen. So with Psalm 103, there are lots of different options here. We, of course, most of the versions are based on the same melody, the same ancient chant melody, anywhere from very simple settings all the way to Rachmaninoff's Vigil, still the same melody for Psalm 103. There are other versions, and they can be done in different ways. There are even Byzantine versions that are written by like OCA type people who go ahead and want to sing it in Byzantine chant, even though that's not how real Byzantine chanters would do it. But there are some nice settings of that. So the way it works again is that you choose which verses you want to sing, and then you have the refrain, the different refrains. There are three that come up during the psalm, and they are kind of all based on different parts of the psalm, however much of it you do. And Psalm 103 is a really interesting piece of music, and I've changed my thoughts over it a few years ago, because it was finally explained to me by someone that Psalm 103 is telling a story, right? It's telling the story of creation, and the refrains are a prayer that's offered during that story. But the way it's performed in most churches is the opposite, and that the verse is from the psalm become like the soft kind of quiet part, and that the refrain that gets repeated over and over again becomes the loud part. And how many recordings have you heard of Psalm 103 where the verse is soft and all of a sudden they go, bless the Lord, and it gets really, the bless the Lord becomes really loud, and then they go back to the psalm verse again and it's quiet and it's not as important. But it should be the other way around if you think about it, that it's telling a story of creation, and then the prayer is being offered as a response to that story. So I kind of challenge you to maybe think of it that way and to try something. One thing I want to say to everyone is that it is okay to make changes in your church music, even if you've been doing the same thing for 30, 50 years. It's fine. People get scared of it, but it's okay. There's a good quote I like that some people don't like, but it's by one of our former OCA bishops in his liturgical notes to his priest, and it says, there's no reason to continue a bad practice just because it's a habitual bad practice, right? So just because you've been doing something for 50 years doesn't mean you have to continue doing it if it's not helpful or if it's not the correct way. It doesn't apply to all these musical things, but it's a good quote I like to keep in my mind. It's okay to make changes. So just because you sung something like this forever, it doesn't mean that none of us are ever too old to start thinking about something in a different way, and thinking about theological reasons for why we're doing music in certain ways is really important, or liturgical reasons, or both. So if you want to do, depending on your setting, you can add verses to make it longer. Again, if you have a version that's if you have a big church but a short version that you're used to singing and you doesn't have much time, I also challenge everyone to ask your priest next time you do Vigil, say, how many prayers are you able to read before we end Psalm 103? How many of the prayers are you able to get through? And make it a challenge to give them time to read more of their prayers if you can. So some of the different versions of Psalm 103 that you can do, you can add verses, or you can, I've done some before. If everybody here knows one of the Chesnikov settings, I don't think I've ever seen it in English, but in Slavonic, it only has two verses. It only has two verses, and then the refrains, and then it's over. It only lasts about 2 minutes. And I was directing this once in a cathedral And I said, this isn't going to be enough time. So I had a canonarch read all the verses first in between, and then we would sing after them. And that just gave us a little bit more time. We didn't have to add any extra verses. He just read the same ones that we were doing while the choir held out the chords, and it ended up being a really pretty nice way to do it. But there are various versions, and one of the ones I'm going to share a little bit of music tonight. And so one of the ones that you can do, that you can add quite a bit to, is the version of Psalm 103 by Father Sergei Glagolov, who reposed very recently, and it's a very well-known version in the OCA. But the nice thing about it is you can do as many verses from Psalm 103 as you want in this version. It's got the refrains set up in a way that you can do one verse here, or you can do 2 or 3, and you can add all the verses in. I talked a little bit last week about how I've done some of the all-night vigils. When we do a real all-night vigil at my parish overnight, we do the entire psalm at the beginning of the service. We do it in a Byzantine style and chant the verses, but we do all the verses of the psalm, not just 3 or 4. Not all the time, but occasionally you can do that. So there are versions out there that you can do. And so I just wanted to share this Father Sergei's setting of this, which also gives the choir, it gives you the sound of having antiphonal choirs, even if you don't have antiphonal choirs, by having trios and smaller groups, and then the full verse refrains. So this is Father Sergei's version of Psalm 103. Is recorded by Capella Romana several years ago. And let me make sure real quick before I hit go that the sound is going to share. Okay. Hear it? Give me a thumbs up if you have your camera on. Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thou art clothed with honor and majesty. Blessed art thou, O Lord, who coverest thyself with light as with a garment. Blessed art thou, O Lord, who hast laid the beams of thy chambers on the waters. The waters stood above the mountains. How glorious are thy works, O Lord! Thou makest springs gush forth in the valleys, they flow between the hills. How glorious are thy works, O Lord! From thy lofty abode thou waterest the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of thy work. How glorious are thy works, O Lord! How manifold are thy works, O Lord, in wisdom. In wisdom hast thou made them all. Glory to thee, O Lord, who hast created all. May the glory of
to the next slide. Here we go. So you can hear there how you can add, you could add more verses. You can just keep repeating those refrains and they kind of change. It's also a great setting because it was composed in English, not in Slavonic or Greek, and then translated in English. It was written in English, so the melody matches the text. But there are, again, lots of different versions of Psalm 103 that you can do. And, keep those things in mind, though. Think about your church size, your clergy, talk to them and ask them, how does it go? Sometimes I wonder how many of us sometimes ask the priest, like, did you have enough time today? Or did you, as we're directing our choirs and thinking about how that kind of goes. So, all of that's just the very beginning of the service, right? We really haven't gotten much into the Vespers yet. So following Psalm 103, then again, once the deacon or the priest have had time to do everything, comes the Great Litany, pretty standard thing, the Great Litany. And then it's followed on Saturday nights, especially by the first Kathisma, right? Every Saturday night is appointed the first Kathisma. And actually at Vigil, as it says, or on Saturday night, the entire first Kathisma is actually appointed to be done at Vespers. Unless you're in a monastery, it's going to be very rare that you see that done, but it is what is appointed. Typically what you see is a setting of the first stasis of the Kathisma, the first 3 psalms, with selected verses with the refrain Alleluia, and generally called Blessed is the Man or something like that. And if you were going to do the whole Kathisma, you could still do Blessed is the Man, that and then you actually go on then and read the second and third stasis of the first Kathisma after that, with the little Lord have mercy, Alleluia, Alleluia in between each stasis, kind of like at Matins. But it is appointed to be the whole psalm, the whole Kathisma at Vespers. But again, this is one of those places where you can shorten it very easily, and it's in the standard practice. More standard is to have Blessed is the Man done. Hold on, we've got a note here. Okay, that's about the Vespers. Yeah, we'll come back to some of these notes. One option that you can do, though, to add a little bit to this service is we do a version in our church of Blessed is the Man where we still do the same verses that are normally done, but we have a reader chant all the other verses in between those while the choir repeats the Alleluia refrain. And you can get through the whole first stasis pretty quickly that way. It doesn't really add that much more time. So if you're ever interested in adding more of the Psalms, that's one of the ways you could do that. But Blessed is the Man, again, sort of like the Psalm 103, it's interesting to think about the way we perform it, right? And this is a very similar idea, that the Psalm verse is the story or the Psalm, and then the Alleluia is the prayer for refrain. And it doesn't have to be super loud. It can be, quiet and prayerful on those Alleluias, and then the verses again can be brought out a little bit more. It's a different way of thinking of it than sometimes you hear. And these are the kind of things that you can think about if you're trying to kind of add more in. But Blessed is the Man, very standard. At weekday vigils, the Manean generally will tell you whether you're supposed to sing Blessed is the Man or not. There are some feasts, mostly the Feast of the Lord, especially, that if it's a weekday, it will say, do not sing Blessed is the Man. So it'll say you just skip it altogether. And of course, on Sunday, we don't have Kathismas read at all, so it would always be kind of left out. So this is a good note. At this monastery, there's no priest, so they do the totality of the psalm with refrains and singing it. So yeah, you've got various. Definitely, if you don't have a priest, you've got all the time in the world. Then you don't have to worry about anybody. You can kind of go for what you want. So after the Kathisma, however much of it you do, whether you do the full first Kathisma or just the first stasis, there's the little litany. And then we get into kind of the major chunk of the major part of Vespers, right? Lord, I've cried, or Lord, I've called, however your translation renders that. And there are lots of different ways to do this, lots of different traditions. The main tradition will be that we kind of see is to, the choir sings, the reader reads the psalms, and then they go back and forth singing. But there are older versions where the choir may sing all of it, or where chanters alternate verses, or there's an older Russian tradition, which I've done once or twice, where the choir sings the refrain, "Hear us, O Lord," throughout the psalm verses that are read by the reader in very different ways. So there's all these kind of different options and different ways to do "Lord, I've Cried." But generally, the way it starts is that the choir will sing these introductory verses, "Lord, I've cried unto thee, hear me, O Lord," and they're in two sections. So the first one ends, "Hear me, O Lord," and then traditionally, if you had two choirs, then the second choir would pick up with "Let my prayer arise," or "Let my prayer be set forth," or "Let my prayer be directed." All three translations happen in the OCA. "As incense before thee," and that's when the censing starts. Usually the deacon will start censing, or the priest. But it's done by a second choir. So, musically, there's a break sort of in between those two sections, a little bit of a break. But "Lord, I've Cried" is always sung, not necessarily in the tone of the week, but in the tone of the first hymn or the first sticheron. And on a Saturday night, that should be the tone of the week normally, unless it's, again, Palm Sunday or something. But on a weekday vigil, it could be lots of different tones, or even a weekday vespers. If it's a 60 hero service, you're not using the Autoikos or something. It's whatever tone the first sticheron is in. So you go to the "Lord, I've Cried" stichera, and then you look at the tone, and you go kind of back it up to "Lord, I've Cried," and that's the tone you sing "Lord, I've Cried" in. So that's just a little hint. It's not always going to be the tone of the week. But generally on a Saturday it should be. So that's how you figure that out. And the same thing applies later to the praises and things like that. It's the tone of the first sticheron that you use to dictate what tone you're going to sing the introductory material in. So then again, you have different options here. The normal one is that the reader reads the Psalms that come after that, 140, 141. And they get to the end of that, then the verses kind of start in between 129 and 116. And these are all Septuagint numbers. But a shorter version is to skip all that. So, there's lots of times where you'll see, to do a shorter version of Vespers or Vigil, they may skip straight from the choir singing "Lord, I've Cried" all the way to verse 10, and then just go and do the stichera. That's an option that, again, can be made for various reasons. You may not have a reader or something, who knows. So that's an option that can be done to leave out those kind of readings. Another version, though, one that is very prevalent in Russia, especially in monasteries, is that the choir sings the Psalms in a certain melody. We'll actually hear a version of that here in a minute. And it's kind of a nice way to do it. Sometimes gives the reader they don't need a break yet. They probably haven't done anything, but it kind of makes the service move a little bit quicker. It's really nice for feasts. Saturday vigils will always have 10 stichera. It's always on 10 on Saturday nights. Other days can vary between 6 and 8, depending on the rank of the feast. Pre-sanctified liturgies also always have 10 stichera, with the exception of Wednesday in the 5th week, when it has 31 during Lent. There are 31 stichera, "Lord, I've Cried." And on Annunciation, where there are 11 at the Vesperal liturgy. But other than that, it's pretty much generally always going to be 10 on Saturday nights. And these 10 stichera come from various places. So this is where these rubrics that we talked about come in. You can go to the outlines that the OCA provides, or you can go to the actual service itself, or you can go to the liturgical calendar that comes from St. Tikhon's. And for the weekends, at least, you can go in those places and you can see, you can pull up the service, and it'll say, we'll take last night, for instance, for the Sunday of the Prodigal Son, it'll tell you that "Lord, I've Cried." You're going to sing "Lord, I've Cried" in tone 2. And then the first 6 stichera, "Lord, I've Cried," come from the Autoikos in tone 2. for Sunday night or for Saturday night. And so you pull those out if you don't have them pulled out, or you can use the version that the OCA provides that's already marked for singing. And you can pull those, or as a matter of fact, the OCA website has, if I can pull it up, has the music here. And this is a site I'll show you. Let me pull this one up. I meant to link to it and I didn't do it yet. I'm going to pull it over here in front of my screen real quick. And if you go to the music section again and go to music downloads, the Vespers one doesn't have very much in it yet. But if you go down here to the services of the weekly cycle, the Octologos, and you go to tone 2, and then you go here and look at Lord I've Cried, they have, or Lord I Call, they have the introductory material. Then they have all the resurrectional stihira in modern or Elizabethan English, in Obocode or Kievan chant, typed up with music. So there's music here for those. And then the Dogmaticon, and then the Apostica, and the Troparian and Kentuckian dismissal they have. And they even have some of the stuff for Matins, right? God is the Lord, or the Lord is God, whichever pronunciation or translation you use. Some of the canon refrains here, the praises. So they've got a lot of the stuff here for you, music-wise, in various, either both in Kievan and Obocode chant that's available. All right. So, then the other 4 verses for last night, to make up the 10, the rubrics will say come from the Triodian. And so you go to the Triodian, you go to the Sunday of the Prodigal Son. There's actually only 2 in there, and they're repeated. And, that's how you get the 4. So very often we're repeating stihira to get to the right number, as dictated by the rubrics. Then we have you have a glory verse, or maybe not. And the first question here that somebody already typed in is wanting to talk about Apostica Theotokia, but also any Lord I've Cried also. So the verse that comes after the glory and anything is called the Doxosticon. And Doxosticon just means glory verse. That's what it stands for. It's the verse that comes after glory. Doxa meaning glory. And the Doxosticon either may not exist for a service, right? We talked about simple services last week. Simple services, lots of times, do not have a glory verse at Lord I've Cried. In that case, if there's nothing in the Manan, that's how you figure it out. Usually the Manan will have one, or the Triodian or whatever, will have a glory verse in it or not. If it doesn't, you do glory now and ever, and you go on to the Theotokian. But if there is a glory verse in there, then you split it, and that's kind of how you figure it out. It's as simple as just looking in the Manan or the Triodian and seeing if there's a glory verse there, and if there is, you do it. If there's not, then you don't do it. Again, the rubrics will tell you that too for that specific day if they've been made, and that's kind of how you figure that out. So if there is a glory verse, it's going to come not from the Octologos usually. It's going to come from the Manan or the Triodian or the Pentecostarian if we're in that season of the year. And then you have that followed after now and ever by the Dogmaticon. When we're at Lord I've Cried, there are 8 Theotokia that are called Dogmatica, the Dogmaticon. And it's basically a Theotokian that proclaims some kind of major doctrine in the church. There are only 8 of them. There's 1 in each tone. The general saying I like to use is that all Dogmatica are Theotokia, but not all Theotokia are Dogmatica. So there are only 8 Dogmaticon hymns that qualify as that. They're generally a little bit longer. They bring in some kind of doctrine, and they only come after Lord I've Cried. And they are written for the Saturday night Octologos, but they do get used at other vigil services or Great Vespers. If you're doing a vigil for St. John Chrysostom, then at Lord I've Cried, the Theotokian will be the Dogmaticon. It won't just be some other Theotokian, because it's a big vigil class feast. So they do get used at other times, but they are written for the Octologos. So, but the way the stihira are done basically is that the reader reads, up to the whatever verse you're stopping on, if it's 10, and they're numbered from backwards. So it's the 10th verse from glory, basically, is where you stop, and then you 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the reader reads the verse, and the choir then sings the stihira that comes after it. Again, there are lots of different ways to do this. The bigger Russian tradition is that the reader reads half of the verse and that the choir sings the second half of the verse to a specific melody, and then they sing the Sticherin. So I do have a recording. This is in Slavonic, but it's an interesting recording because you get to hear two different things. Number one, it's done in canon art style, which is an older form of doing church music, where not everybody had a copy of the text. So a canon arc would say each line first, right, and then then the choir repeats it in the correct melodies. And so that's what you'll hear in this. They announce the tone, they say the verse, and choir sings the things from memory. And then it also includes the choir singing the psalms instead of having a reader read them. So you get to hear. It's kind of a quick way that you can do it, where you can sing through the psalms at Lord I've Cried, and also at the praises. It works there too. So this is just an audio recording, and this is from the Holy Trinity St. Sergius Lavra's Representation Church in Moscow, an older recording of a Vespers service conducted by Vladimir Gorbik.
Глаз третий, Господи, возвах Тебе, услыши меня. Господи, возвах Тебе, услыши меня. Услыши меня, Господи. Господи, возвах Тебе, услыши меня. Помилуй, глаз умоления моего. Негда возвать имя к Тебе.
They're singing Lord I've Cried right at this moment. Then let my prayer arise. So they, they start with the canonical style. They will go, and kind of, when they get to the Stahira after that, they do them completely in the canonical style too. And so it's a really interesting kind of way to do that. But you can hear how you can sing the psalm, and it makes it a little bit more kind of a festive event. It doesn't work with all the tones, I'll tell you that much. It doesn't work very well with tone 6 or some of the other minor tones, but it works well with the tones that are kind of in D minor, like, or that sound almost in major if you don't do all the parts. So it's just another way that you can bring something new to your Vespers if you haven't done it before. I have this written out where with the music for the first verse, and then just all the verses kind of marked. If anybody ever is interested, you can email me, and we'll kind of look at that. So after Lord, I've Cried, then of course we have the clergy entrance. And here's one of the deviations between like Daily Vespers and Great Vespers. Daily Vespers has no entrance, right? The clergy don't come out for Daily Vespers. As soon as Lord, I've Cried is over, the choir just goes straight on to sing Gladsome Light, and there's no entrance at all, which is one of the reasons that a deacon doesn't serve at Daily Vespers if you have one. Normally, it's not always the case. But the entrance, the clergy come out. Generally, they'll get ready to come out during the Doxosticon, if there is one, or at least by the Dogmaticon. The priest actually says a prayer while they're walking out. A lot of people don't hear, and then they do a blessing for the entrance. All usually while the choir is singing. It's an entrance with the censer, and then the deacon or priest, will make the entrance wisdom stand upright, or let us attend, however they say it in your church, and then the choir sings Gladsome Light. And one thing we haven't talked about really is lights, because it varies so much. But traditionally at Vespers, at least, this would be the first time sometimes that the lights are come up in a way. Gladsome Light is kind of meant to be almost done at sunset, and you can hear that in the words. But Gladsome Light's an interesting point in the service. It's another one of these hymns that I've changed my thinking on over the years, and I tend to do it much slower now than I used to do, and quieter, until certain parts. When we talk about the Trinity, the Father, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that's kind of a bigger moment, and there are different ways, but it varies between different versions. But there are so many versions of Gladsome Light that you can do. Again, I don't sell yourself just with one. Explore the different Gladsome Lights that exist, chant versions and composed versions, and all these different kinds. So many more that are popping up in English these days are very, very interesting. So Gladsome Light is a it's a major part, because again there's an entrance. The lights are on. Generally, the royal doors are open. It's kind of this bigger part of the service. Then after Gladsome Light, if it's Great Vespers or Vigil, the deacon and the choir will do the evening Prokimenon. And on Saturday nights, it's technically a great Prokimenon. It has more than just one verse. It has three verses. And so these great Prokimenons, can follow various melodies. In Russia, the proto-deacons very often sing these great Prokimenons. They'll sing the melodies too. It's not just the choir, but they even have various melodies for the different verses. So when you choose your settings, it's a good idea. You can talk to the deacon and see what kind of things they want to do for the Prokimenon. But the Prokimenon on Saturday night, the doors are open. It's generally done that way. For weekdays, the priest may do it from within the altar or outside the royal doors. But it's this is where the Prokimenon goes. If it were Daily Vespers, as soon as the Prokimenon is over, you move into doing the to vouchsafe, O Lord. But for Great Vespers, of course, the Vigil, depending on the rank of the feast, there may be Old Testament readings or even New Testament readings if it's an apostle, right? The Old Testament readings become New Testament for the apostles. But we have the Old Testament readings would happen after the Prokimenon, if there are any appointed in the Manan or the Triodian or whatever book it is that you might be using. Then you go on a Saturday night to the Litany of Fervent Supplication. which we also call the augmented litany. The term augmented litany is the musical term for it, because augmentation in music is when you add things and make it longer. So by adding 3 Lord have mercies, it becomes augmented as opposed to 1. Sometimes I have people ask, like, what is it that we're augmenting about the theologically? Nothing. It's really called the litany of fervent supplication, or as one really bad translation I saw from the French book that was written in French, they called it the Sonnet of Demands, and I was like, I would never call it demands; it's supplications. So the augmented litany, though, here the triple Lord have mercies comes after the Praecamenon, or after the Old Testament readings. Then we have Vouchsafe, O Lord, and Vouchsafe, O Lord is another big variation place. Typically, in most churches, Vouchsafe at Vigil or at any service is read outside of Bright Week, right? Pascha and Bright Week, you sing Vouchsafe no matter what. Everything is sung at those services. But there is a Russian tradition to sing Vouchsafe at all vigils, whether it's Saturday night or it's a great feast. So there are lots of options to do that, to sing Vouchsafe anytime at every vigil. And it's a tradition that's definitely alive in Rocor, not so much in many OCA places. I think some of the St. Tigans may do it now more often than they used to. But it is a very kind of popular idea to sing Vouchsafe at vigils, not just during Bright Week. And then this is Vouchsafe is then followed by the evening litany, which is the litany of supplication. But it's easier to define because it starts with "Let us complete our evening prayer to the Lord," or if it's matins, it's "Let us complete our morning prayer to the Lord," or if it's liturgy, it's "Let us complete our prayer to the Lord." So these various options, those are all the litany of supplication, and the litany of supplication is the one that has "Grant this, O Lord," as a refrain in it. And so at Great Vespers, the litanies are done that way: augmented litany, Vouchsafe, evening litany. At Daily Vespers, because we'll just point out some of the differences, it's different. After the Praecamenon, you immediately go to Vouchsafe, and then the evening litany, and then the augmented litany gets put at the end of the service. So it's a little bit different order, but it's one that at least we all usually at least see at Forgiveness Vespers. If you don't serve Daily Vespers very often, but you do Forgiveness Vespers, you kind of see that order there, where it's a daily Lenten and Vespers, and Lenten services are a whole other thing to discuss. So after that, I do have another video here that we'll come back to towards the end, as a little treat of a setting of Vouchsafe. But one of the bigger things that comes up then at Vigil is, and another big question is the Litia. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about Litia as part of Vigil. So the Litia is, a term that gets used for a couple different things. There's also Litia is a term sometimes used for a short panihida. In some traditions, they have a Litia service that's kind of like sometimes called a Trisagion service. They can follow different ways, but the Litia at Vigil is a little procession that everyone makes, and the clergy and the choir, even too, the choir can do it. I encourage sometimes that if you have the right size choir and you have the right amount of space, you can take your choir to the narthex also. You'll see that in Byzantine monastery, Athonite monasteries, the choirs go with the clergy for the Litia. But the Litia, the clergy process, out. If a bishop was serving Vigil, this is the first thing they would do, right? When the bishop serves Vigil, he only does 2 things generally: Litia, and then the Polylean and magnification part of the service, and the gospel reading. But they don't do much else at Vespers. They don't even fully vest for the Litia. They kind of half vest in their mantia and their omophorion. But the bishop comes out for this. So the bishop comes out of the altar with the clergy. Sometimes there's a censing, sometimes not. The deacon will cense the iconostasis. But they'll go to the narthex or somewhere in the back of the church if the narthex isn't accessible. Sometimes they'll even go outside I've seen them go to the front porch of the church for the Lutia. It's just it's kind of done, outside of the main part of the church, and the choir sings various hymns that are appointed, and it varies by the day. So technically, Litia can be served every Saturday vigil. Every vigil for Saturday can have Litia. It's pretty much always going to be for your if it's a normal Sunday and there's not Litia verses in the Manan, you would do the Litia verses for your patronal feast, and maybe there's a Doxosticon or something that can be sung, as there is with these Triodian Sundays. There are Litia Doxostica for the Sundays of the Triodian, so you could have done Litia last night or next week, and that's how it works. But if it's a non-great feast, the first Stichirin is for the temple, and if there are verses for the feast like a saint, you would do them afterwards. And that's Stichirin to the temple, to your patronal feast. It just comes from your actual patronal feast service. So, in my case, in my church's case, it's St. Maximus the Confessor. We just pull the Litia verse from January 21st, which is St. Maximus's feast, and we sing that, anytime we do Litia, and it says to add one for your temple. That's where that comes from. And you could do all of them, if there's nothing else to do or whatever. Then, like I said, like in these Triodian Sundays, you do all this to hear for their temple. Then the Doxosticon is from the Triodian. So if the Litia, if it's a great feast, though, all the verses come from the Manan. And if it's a lesser feast, then you kind of combine your saint and then the ones from the Manan or wherever they come from. And so the choir sings those verses as the clergy come out. And again, they can go sing them in the narthex too, or they can sing them from wherever. I'll tell you, for me, it's a very arbitrary decision. If the choir is too big, we don't move. Usually, we stay where we're put. But if there's only 5 or 6 of us, then we'll go stand in the narthex. But if there's like 15 or 16 people, we don't leave our spot because it's just too much. There's not enough room in the narthex for us all to stand. So that's there's no real reason for it. It's just a kind of logistics. So once the choir is done singing those Litia verses, and for some feasts there are quite a bit. Some feasts have like 8 verses for the Litia, some have 2. It really just depends on how the service is written. Sing as many of them as you want. Then the deacon or priest will do the Litia petitions, and the first Litia petition that's done is the long prayer from Matins, "O God, save thy people," where the clergy commemorate all the different saints, right? And that list varies by church. And so you've got all these different, this very long petition here that occurs, and the names can vary between service books or between jurisdictions. There's a question. Litia just means like supplication. It's like litany. It means supplications. It's litia. It's just to add, something you're asking for. So that's why it's all these long supplications that we make at the Litia. So the first one is this very long prayer, right? It actually gets repeated in the Litia itself. The deacon says it once, and the priest reads the whole thing again at the end, and then it gets repeated again at Matins, so 3 times through the individual. And then the choir does responses, and there are again variations here. They're both written here. The real amount of responses that's in the service book is that after the first petition, the choir sings "Lord have mercy" 40 times. After the second petition, 50 times. After the third, it's 30. And then for the fourth and fifth, it's just 3. Now, the short version of that is to do 12, 12, 12, 3, and 3. Because some people don't want to do 40, 50, and 30. It's quite a bit. Of course, there are versions that you can do. We find that the Athonite version from Simon of Petra works well to do this 40 or 50. The one that has a like Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie, that one that moves up and down the scale is really nice. We even do it in Greek and English. It's kind of a nice little thing you can do. But you can do, you can pull out Lvovsky's 75 Lord Have Mercy's version and cut it down or something. There's various options. There are different things you can do for that, or you can just sing straight ones if you want, however you want to do it. But typically, most people will just do 12, 12, and 3, the typical kind of 12 Lord have mercies that you might do. But that's the proper way, though, is this 40, 50, 30, 3, 3 if you want to do a bigger litia. And again, so the deacon does these petitions, and then it's the priest at the end will do the prayer version of that same "Oh God Save Thy People," and do usually the whole list again, or maybe a shortened version, kind of up to the priest on what they're going to do. And then at the end of that everybody goes back to their well, at least the choir goes back to their places. The clergy, if they've done litia, will go into the middle of the church where the tray has been set out, the litia tray, with the 5 loaves that are to be blessed and wine, wheat, and oil that are all part of the litia blessing. And there's candles usually on that little table, and they'll stay there until the blessing is over. So that's how the litia is kind of inserted in. Now, litia is something that's very often not done for various reasons. Maybe there's nobody to bake bread, or you have no bread to bless. You don't do litia. There is a practice, though, to do litia without without the blessing of bread. If you don't have any, you can still sing the litia hymns and even do the petitions, and then just go on to the Apostico like normal. So I know some places that do that. So there are various variations there again that you can do. But the full version of the litia is this here, as it's kind of described. So then you would go back, and then the choir immediately does the Apostico hymns, which again just means stick means verse. It says these hymns with verses. And the Apostico on Saturday night, at least, there are 4 stichera there with verses in between that are the same verses from the Great Prokimenon on Saturday night, actually. Then there may be a doxasticon or not, as was asked earlier. The one thing I didn't mention with Lord I've Cried is that the dogmaticon is always in the tone of the week, no matter what tone the doxasticon is in. The dogmaticon is always in the tone of the week. At the Apostico, technically the rubrics would say that the Theotokian at the Apostico is in the tone of the doxasticon, not necessarily the Theotokian. Now this is another place where there can be variation in practice. Some people still like to do the ones for the resurrection, because if you follow the other practice, then sometimes you would never hear some of the tones. There aren't a lot of doxastica written in tone 7, so you very rarely hear the tone 7 Theotokian for the Apostico if you were to follow that or something like that. So there's some variation there, but the rubrics say that it's in the same tone of the doxasticon if there is one. If there's not one, it will be the tone of the week. So you have the Apostico with its verses. Then the choir sings St. Simeon's prayer. The general rule is that if there's an entrance before gladsome light, then St. Simeon's prayer is sung. If there's no entrance, then it's read. So at daily Vespers, you would read St. Simeon's prayer always. But at Great Vespers, you would sing it because there's been an entrance taking place. St. Simeon's prayer also is one of these hymns that it's not really assigned to a tone. A lot of us sing it in tone 6. A lot of people sing it in tone 6. But it's not actually assigned that tone. It's one of these pieces like Gladsome Light that could be written to many different melodies. Lots of variations on that. Can be a composed piece in any kind of style, and there are lots of great compositions. Father Sergei Glaglev again has a really nice version of St. Simeon's prayer, but there are a lot of very famous Russian versions that are very accessible for parish choirs too, or just some in Kievan chant or whatever it may be. That's just then followed by the reader doing the Trisagion prayers, Holy God through our Father, and then of course we have this kind of ending part of Vigil Vespers. When the litia is not served, typically you still end the service sort of like you did litia, but the choir will sing Rejoice, O Virgin 3 times, or maybe twice with the Festal Troparion if there's one that exists or something like that. And this is again an interesting hymn to talk about, Rejoice, O Virgin. You don't have to sing the same setting 3 times. That might be interesting to hear, but you can vary it if you want to. Sometimes we sing a simple one for the first 2 times, and then maybe one that's a little bit more interesting for the 3rd time. But you also need to be careful with that. Like, obviously, you don't want to sing Rachmaninoff's Bogorodice Dievo 3 times at Vigil, right? That would take a really long time and be very taxing on the singers. But if you were at a church that like really wants to do that every once in a while, you could sing it simple twice, sing a phased version the 3rd time. And there are some versions that are based on chant that are 3 versions of the chant that vary. So there are different ones you can find, but it doesn't have to just be oboe tone 4 3 times in a row if you don't want it to be. There's places to give some variation there with the Rejoice, O Virgin. That's followed then by singing Blessed be the name of the Lord 3 times. And then technically Psalm 33 verses 1 through 11. This is another one of those places where people can make a cut, right? Even in a liturgy, you're supposed to sing all of Psalm 33 at the end, the whole thing, and that definitely gets left out most of the time. Especially if certain bishops are serving and they're tired and they skip it and they just go ahead and come on out and give the blessing and they're done. So, but that is there. So Psalm 33 verses 1 through 11 is done at the end of every vigil, not just if there's liturgy or not technically. And then the priest comes out and does the short blessing, not the dismissal, but just a blessing. And then you have then you go into matins. If Litia is served, there's just a little bit of variation here, because instead of singing Rejoice, O Virgin 3 times, typically if there's Litia, that probably means that you're singing. Now, if you're just doing Litia on a Saturday night and there's no major saint, you do still sing it 3 times, but it's while the deacon senses around the table for the blessing. And then, but often it might be that you do the Troparion for a feast. If it's a weekday vigil, especially, Sunday of the Cross or something coming up, you'd sing the Troparion for the Cross. Or if it's a vigil class saint, you would sing the Troparion of the Saint twice and Rejoice, O Virgin once. So there's some different options there on how that works. Or if it's Saturday night, it's the other way around. So you do need to check your rubrics. Excuse me. Sometimes, depending, to tell you exactly what you're supposed to do there. But generally, you're going to sing whatever Troparion 3 times while the deacon senses around the table. And then you stop. The priest blesses the loaves at that point. Then the choir sings Blessed be the name of the Lord and Psalm 33. And then the priest gives the blessing. And then Matins begins with the 6 Psalms. Of course, we'll talk about variations with that next week. Some of the other, but if we were doing daily Vespers or Great Vespers by itself, I didn't put it on here, but the ending is a little bit different, right? See, if we were just serving Great Vespers, after the Apostica, you would do the Troparion for the day first, or if it's a Saturday night, you do the Resurrectional Troparion, then the Troparion for the day, and the Dismissal Theotokion in the tone of the Troparion preceding it. So if it's Vespers by itself, that's how it ends. So this is another one of those things that some people don't want to hear. You do not sing Rejoice, O Virgin if you're not doing Vigil. It's not appointed. So if you're doing Great Vespers by itself on a Saturday night, technically Rejoice, O Virgin Theotokos is not sung. So it's another one of those traditions that some people do, but is not technically what's to be sung there. And again, I'm not telling you to change what you're doing, but it's something to think about. Why do we do that? The answer, instead of stopping doing it, is do Vigil. Add Matins on, and then you'll be okay. Or a different kind. And we're also going to talk next time a little bit about this, like I mentioned last week, there's a cathedral vigil, which is a way that you can start doing parts of vigil without doing the whole entire service. And we'll talk about how that works next week as well. But I think let's go ahead and see. I think I've been watching the chat, so I've been trying to. So we talked about the Theotokia. Then Mother Elizabeth talked about the antiphonal singing is good and how that's performed. No questions here. Let's see. So in the Serbian tradition, Psalm Lord I've cried is, yeah, there's lots of different variations of singing these, of Lord I've cried especially has lots of variations between the different types of churches. Great. So, and we talk about what liturgy means. Okay. So if anybody has questions, we can go ahead and discuss some of them. You can either type them in the chat. I'm watching the chat, or oh wait, before we get to the questions, real quick, I'll go. Yeah, I said I'd have some links, and so oh, and there's one more note on bells here. There is a bell peal specifically for the end of matins, or for the end of vespers that leads in the matins, and you start it during the singing of the Troparia, and it goes up until the exclamation that the priest gives, but doesn't go on into the 6 psalms. So again, if you're using bells, you're adding bells, or you want to start adding bells, and there are some hints for that. I've also got some different links here to places to find music, because again, like I said, the OCA site currently only has 1 or 2 pieces in the Vespers section, and more will be added, but there are lots of other places that you can go. Just to show you some of these, Podobin.org is a site that is mostly run by OCA people, with pretty standard OCA music, just sometimes the translations are a little bit different. But you go here and you've got either male choir or mixed choir. You can go to the Vigil section, and here they've got 15 versions of Psalm 103 that you can sing, or 13 versions of Blessed is the Man. So there's lots of music here. Again, settings for the Octoakos, 33 gladsome lights. Some of these are getting pretty, some of these sections get pretty big. St. Simeon's Prayer, even Psalm 33 and stuff like that. So they've got quite a bit of music here in English and in Slavonic, with MIDI recordings that you can follow along with. A row chorus site, but that is very good for finding music, is this Orthodox Church Music site here. Again, they've got a Vigil section, but also Manayan. And somebody asked last week, I think, about Podobins at the end of the Podobin melodies at the end of the last week's webinar. And this is a really good website where you can find either the melodies, or within like the Manayan or Triarian section, they will have maybe some Podobins that are written out already for you and that you can sing. So it's a great little site too. The newer site that's really more for kind of study, and if you're going to do Slavonic, is this Orthodox Sacred Music Reference Library that is trying to catalog and give original versions of pieces, for a lot of Russian composers, that you can go in and search for by composer or by chant, and you can find all of their original music. Now, some of the times the trick is that this is really the original music, so maybe from 1750 and written in soprano, alto, tenor, clef, or something like that, and you have to actually try to figure that out. But it's a great little resource that Vlad Morrison kind of runs for Musica Rusica. And speaking of course, Musica Rusica's website, where you can download recordings and buy sheet music of various works, especially new pieces in English. There's quite a bit that's here that you can download, including the music by Father Sergei Glogolev. The book that the recording I played comes from is a book that was made through Psalm, but Musica Rusica carries it, and you can still purchase it from them. And I believe it's even on sale right now for only $20, and it has most of Father Sergei's music in it that he composed in English. And then also St. Tikhon's Seminary has a new music website too, where you can go and download music from St. Tikhon's, and some of it you pay for, some of it you don't. They also have memberships where you can just pay a fee and you can download all the music you want. So they have various options there. So these are all different places that you can find music that you might need to use, even though they may not have the OCA website that doesn't have everything yet. But again, the OCA website has quite a bit, especially with the tones. And if you need to learn the tones, they have the How to Learn Tones page that I showed last week, with both Obokoda and Kievan chant there that you can do. So, all right. So now I'm ready for questions.
Okay, everyone, if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand virtually. Or you could probably just unmute yourself and chime in at this point. Does anyone have any questions? You can also, of course, put it into the chat. Any questions? While we're waiting for questions, I wanted to point out also that the question was sent to us several times about where the videos are for this webinar and our previous webinars, and they're on the OCA YouTube page. So you can go to youtube.com and then just search for Orthodox Church in America, and you'll see the OCA YouTube channel, and all of the videos that we've had for the Department of Liturgical Music are there. And of course, last week's session was there. This week's session will be there at least by tomorrow. Any questions?
Yes, and so the question came up about sending out this presentation. Well, Father Tom and I'll figure out how to do that, because I need to send out last week's too. I said that we would try to send out last week's slides to those who have registered. And we can try, we'll definitely get those out to everyone.
We can do that tomorrow.
Yes.
We have a question from Matushka Kathy. Do you use the St. John of Chicago site? Why or why not?
Probably why not, just because I guess I've never been sent to it before. It's I'll have to take a look, go and look for it. I feel like somebody mentioned it last week too. I'll take a look and see. I'm just one of those people who's kind of set in the places where I go. But there are some really good ones. Another one I mentioned and is the OCA Diocese of the West. Has a really good website. Father Lawrence Margitich in Santa Rosa, who's a really great musician and choir director, former choir director himself, has done a lot of arrangements, and he puts them up on the Diocese of the West music website too. So, and the Diocese of New York and New Jersey has a really good website for music also. So there are quite a few of those. I will find the question about the bell ringing site. I have to find their actual website, and I will add it to the presentation, or I can maybe add it in right now here to the chat, because I do have it. It's called the Church Bell Company. Here it is. And they don't just teach you how to use bells, but they also install them for people too. So they've got videos now. So if you have bells, bell ringing is a very major part of the services. It's not just something extra, but bells are used to tell people, number one, when the services are starting, but also to highlight major parts of the service. So it's definitely something that to be look into. And if you're going to be building a church, the bell people will come and help you decide, how you can install bells and things like that.
David writes, I am new to the church and live in Guadalajara, Mexico, where we are just getting started with a mission and none of us have a background in liturgical music. Is there a place you can recommend for the basics along the line of liturgical music for dummies, perhaps?
Sure. So you're there partly, I think, right now. These webinars are kind of designed for that. Also, some of the different dioceses have some resources. We're working on that here in the Diocese of the South. We've tried to do some mission packets or get some mission type music ready. But there are other workshops that the OCA does. Right now, we're running the sight singing class where you can learn how to do sight singing, become a better sight singer. There's also a conducting class for conductors that it's run through the OCA. Then there are other places. St. Tikhon's music department has been running webinars once a month. There are workshops in the summer. St. Vladimir's just announced their music institute for the summer that'll be happening. These are all just within the OCA. There are various people that teach classes. I believe if you go to the Patram Institute website, they don't run classes anymore, but they have a list of classes that you could take. One of the OCA choir directors in New York teaches musicianship, like basic music theory, And then Maria Sheehan teaches 8 tones. I teach liturgics. Benedict Sheehan teaches conducting. There's some people teach various classes that you can find. But since you're in Mexico, and Mexico technically used to be joined with our diocese, feel free to send me an email, and I can guide you to some resources. Archbishop Dimitri used to be the bishop of both the South and Mexico before Mexico got their own bishop, and so we sometimes feel a great affinity, and we're pretty close to here in Texas. So feel free to send me an email, and I can help you find some more resources.
Frederick asks, is Psalm 33 prescribed for the end of all Vesper services, whether Great Vespers, Daily Vespers, or whether or not you are serving a vigil?
No, it's not in part of Daily Vespers outside of Lent, but during Lent, Psalm 33 does creep up into some of the daily services, and it really sometimes depends on the day of the week and the time of the year. But it can be at Lenten Vespers, but it is prescribed for all vigils. So Vespers during Vigil, especially. Great Vespers by itself, again, would end with the Troparia for the day and then the dismissal. You wouldn't have Psalm 33 after the Troparia when they're done normally. But if Vigil is being served and you've sung Rejoice, O Virgin, whether you've done Liturgia or not, you sing Psalm 33 there at the end. But it does come into Daily Vespers during Lent. The Lenten Vespers has kind of a whole extra 1.5 sections added to it for a normal Lenten Vespers. So yeah, that's kind of where it goes.
I have a question. We're in the Diocese of the South, and I think my priest was saying that, so we do this thing after the Trisagian prayers at the end of Vespers, we attach in the Matins Gospel reading. But after Our Father, instead of doing the regular either Rejoice, O Virgin Theotokos or the Troparian sequence, we do the Troparian sequence that would be found after God is the Lord in Matins. Is that a Diocese of the South thing, or is that just our church?
Well, are you doing Matins?
Well, we are doing the Gospel reading for Matins and then having beheld the resurrection of Christ and then straight to the dismissal. So it's like,
okay, so you're doing the half cathedral vigil sort
yeah.
of. No, so no, if you're not doing Matins, then that is the proper ending to Vespers, is to do the Troparian for the day with the dismissal Theotokian, or the resurrectional Troparian for the day, dismissal Theotokian.
But we do the Matin sequence. So instead of just doing one, we'll often do two.
Two resurrections.
Yes.
Okay. So what you're doing, it sounds more like, is just skipping to Matins.
But not
instead of ending Vespers.
We just sort of pull them out. Like, we don't do them attached to God as the Lord. We just do them.
Right.
And then.
Yeah. So you're kind of just skipping ahead to that part, which is, again, as I said last week, and I'm sure Father Tom won't mind, but every priest is his own typicon, and they can sometimes make their own local choices, and very often it's for I talk to priests about this all the time, especially the priests in our diocese. They know that I'm a stickler for things, and so I'll jokingly ask, "Oh, I saw that you did this, this weekend," and something like, "Yeah, I did it." So it's we did it because that's what we had, or that's what we could do. And I'm like, "That's fine, you do what you're doing," and I pick on them. But that's just the variation that you're doing, where you're skipping from basically to that Matins part, because the resurrectional Troparian at Vespers is only sung once, but at Matins it is sung twice. So if that's what you're doing, then you're just not ending Vespers. You're just moving on to the parts of Matins that you're doing for the from this cathedral vigil. And again, we'll talk about that cathedral vigil order next week. And it comes from St. Vladimir's, and there's a very specific kind of method to it. And it sounds like you're adding most of that in. Now, I have seen other variations where they do the Magnificat, and they add the Magnificat to Vespers, which is not part of the regular cathedral vigil. It's something a little bit different. So there's various options. There's different ways you can do that, but it's it's interesting to hear the different practices. You can write me a private message, tell me who your priest is, and I'll poke at him and set them right. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, he claims that that's how Archbishop Dimitri told them to do it. So
Oh,
I
well,
thought
there you go.
it was like a Diocese of the South thing, but I don't know if that's.
We do have some peculiarities down here, so but everybody does, I think. Very good. Other questions? Were there any more in that? Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So I've been singing in the choir for about 3 years now, and I work with, I'm one of the main at the cathedral in Chicago, one of the main singers. I guess my main question I ask is in regards to getting to know, let's say my choir director is stuck in traffic or can't make it, and we have to do a reader service. I'm a little confused which books to look in. I mean, we have almost everything that we would need at the cathedral, but is there anything where I could start, or maybe you could point me in a direction of a bullet point list of the books that I would need to get through a Vespers on my own?
Sure. Actually, we talked about that last week. Have you watched last week's video yet?
I haven't watched it, but I'll go
Okay.
back and check it out.
Yeah, we talked about liturgical books last week, and for Vespers, basically on a Sunday, you need to have access to an Orologian, a Psalter, the Artoikos, and the Manean, at least, yeah, to get through a normal Vesper service, to be able to do that. And I know you guys are struggling. As a matter of fact, I served with Father Alexander this morning down here in Dallas. So,
oh, fantastic! I saw pictures.
we were talking about your choir director, lack of a permanent choir director right now. So I know it's difficult up there, trying to figure out what's going on. But he knows what he's doing. Father Alexander does. But there are those parts. And if you go on the OCA website and go to that rubrics section, you can look up the rubrics for Vespers and the basic rubrics, and it'll tell you. Within the rubrics, by telling you where to pull them, it's telling you which books. So it'll say 6 to hear from the Artoikos and 4 from the Manean. So those are the books you need to pull. We talked about liturgical books last week, and so you can watch there and see kind of what each one has in it and where you find them. And you guys should have a set up there, I'm sure, somewhere.
We do. Thank you very much.
Sure. Any other questions? Would y'all want to hear one more piece of music then? I never turned down listening to music, so I'll go back here real quick. If you have more questions, of course, you can always email me anytime. I love getting emails, and I can talk about liturgics all day long. So email me questions and I will respond. We were talking about singing vouchsafe, and there's various options to do. And I just wanted to play, since this is from Vespers, it's the new setting of Vespers by Benedict Sheehan, which obviously, if you know Benedict's church music, his liturgy and Vespers are not everyday parish pieces, right, that we're going to sing. But this setting of vouchsafe, though, is, I think, something that could be accessible for some choirs at some point. The rest of the Vesper service is very very nice, lots of solo work and very wonderful music. But this setting of vouchsafe is one of the few pieces in his Vespers that doesn't have a solo, and is very nice choral work. And I thought it'd be a nice piece to just to kind of give you here to end. So listen to this. Is Benedict Sheehan, who is the music director at St. Tikhon's Seminary and Monastery, and a composer. And his liturgy is currently nominated for the Grammy Award in choral performance. The Grammys were supposed to have happened last month, but they've been delayed till April. So we'll find out then how he did. But here's his setting of vouchsafe. If you haven't listened to the whole Vespers yet, it's on Spotify. I highly suggest you go and listen to it. It's just really interesting music. It's all based on different chants. So there's Byzantine sections and there's various different things. The song of Saint Simeon there that is an octavist solo with very low notes recorded. So it's a really interesting piece, and the liturgy is also very beautiful. New contemporary Orthodox church music written in a very while maybe difficult for most singers, still in a very Orthodox manner. So good. Well, were there any more questions? Anyone? Well, I look forward to going over Matins next week, which is the scary part. Matins can be the scary service, and I'll do my best to get everybody through it and to not be so scared of it by the time we're done. But, all right.
We have a question from Debbie.
Okay.
Debbie, go ahead and
could you please give us that website again where we could watch the last class that was taught?
yeah, I'm going to send everybody a link tomorrow
Okay.
when we have this one uploaded, but it's at YouTube. There's just not a short URL to give you. I'll copy it and paste it into the chat. Okay.
Thank you.
To confirm the Troparian non-vigil resurrection festival Theotokian. Yes. So to answer the question here in the chat, the Troparia for non-vigil Vespers is Resurrectional Troparian, then the Festal or Troparian for the Saint, and then the Dismissal Theotokian in the tone of the Troparian that came before it. So sometimes it's the same as the Resurrectional, like right now where we don't have, these pre-Lenten Sundays don't have Troparia from the Triodian, so you just sing the Resurrectional one and the Dismissal Theotokian with Glory Now and Ever in between. But yes, normally there's one that goes in between there. So great. Like I said, if you have questions after this, feel free to flood my inbox with them. So I will answer them. This is the second different talk this weekend I've given on church music, completely different topics, and I did a Pan-Orthodox concert on Friday night too. So it's good to fill our time up with all this talk, and I'm excited for what will happen now when everybody starts doing Vigil every week.
And remember that the next talk, the final talk, is on Saturday, this coming Saturday at 1 p.m. About Matins, as Father Deacon said. So please come. I do want to let you know that, as he noted, we are working very hard to fill out the music for the Vespers, the general music, and then of course the movable music with the Stichira for Matins. So we're working hard on that. Yes, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Thanks for the clarification. 1 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. All right, very good. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Father
everyone.
Deacon.
Have a good
Thank
week.
you.